connections that I so value. And I think we've become such a avaricious society of consumption and growth and achievement and progress. And, we've lost some of the power. In your book, you talk about in other cultures where community is just really central, like the moai that are in the Okinawans, where at birth you're sort of thrown in with like other babies or 5 other babies, and that's your like lifelong club of friends who you share everything, tell everything, show up at everything. And that is just it's so different than how we live with our disconnected lives. And I think in your book, share some of the ways in which you sort of can map out how people can break free from that paradigm of our normal way of doing things and reconnect with what really matters, not just because it feels good, but because it determines so much about the quality of our life and our health. And I can you touch on that and touch on how unexpectedly, I talk about food, nutrition all the time, but turns out that maybe loneliness may be a more important risk factor for disease and death than almost anything else.
Well, the great irony, Mark, and I wonder if you resonate with this as you think about your own training, is that for so many of us who are trained in medicine and in other health sciences, we focused so much on some dimensions of health, but there are other pieces that so deeply contribute to our health, like food and sleep and relationships, which we learn very, very little about in training. But the more that we learn from science, the more we delve into research, and more we reflect on our own lives, I think we realize that these are really essential for our health and well-being. One of the things I realized as I was traveling the country as Surgeon General and talking to people about their health is that for so many people, this feeling of being isolated, of being alone, of struggling by yourself was just such a common sentiment. And people often didn't say, I'm lonely, but they would say things like this. They would say, I feel like I've got to bear all these burdens by myself, or I feel if I disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice, or I feel invisible. And hearing that again and again from moms and dads, from people in small villages in Alaska to members of Congress in Washington, D.C., it's made me realize that there's something deeper happening here. And you know what it reminded me of, Mark? It reminded me of 2 things, of my own experiences as a child struggling with loneliness, but also of the patients that I had cared for over the years, who so often would come into the hospital alone. And even at really difficult moments when we had to give them a tough diagnosis, or when we had to make a difficult decision on treatment, or even when at the end of life, in those final hours, there was nobody there other than myself and my colleagues in the hospital to witness those incredibly important moments. So I began to realize just how common this was. But when I delved into the science, to your point about health, Mark, one of the things I came to see is that loneliness is strongly associated with an increased risk of heart disease and dementia, depression, anxiety, premature death, and even sleep disturbances. And it turns out that part of the reason why it's so is because we have evolved over thousands of years to need each other, to depend on each other for safety, for a stable food supply. And over time, that need for each other has become baked into our nervous system, such that when we're separated from one another, it actually places us in a physiological stress state. Our body actually experiences stress. And in the short term, that can be helpful, because if in the short term when you feel loneliness, you might reach out to a friend or stop by and visit a parent or a sibling. But if that continues for a long period of time, then that chronic stress from loneliness can actually cause greater inflammation in our body, can damage tissues and blood vessels, and lead to an increased incidence of heart disease. I say this all not to scare people into worrying that, oh my gosh, because the pandemic is here and we have to physically separate, that suddenly we're at increased risk for illness. But I do think it's important to recognize that our relationships are a really important part of how we stay healthy and how we enjoy life. And so we have to think about how we invest in our relationships the same way we should be thinking about the food that we eat and the sleep that we get. And so it's a key part of our well-being.
Yeah. I mean, it's so striking. You're in fact bringing up something I'd never really thought about before, which is, what is the biology of loneliness? What are the physiologic effects of loneliness on our basic functioning and our health and our brain chemistry and our immune system and our gut microbiome and all kinds of stuff. And I don't know if you know this, but when I went to Haiti after the earthquake and met Paul Farmer and learned about his work using peer support to help deal with AIDS and TB, and did that with Rick Warren for chronic disease and obesity, where we got people doing it together. And I realized that, we talk about, genomics, but I came up with this concept of sociogenomics. What are the effect of our social relationships and networks on our gene expression? And then I just sort of like kind of came up with the term in my head, but I realized it was out. Then I started looking, it was out there. And it was just fascinating to see the data on how, when you're with somebody, and if you are having a deep, empathic, connected, loving interaction, it turns off inflammatory genes, it turns on anti-inflammatory genes, it promotes all these beneficial responses. And the opposite's also true. Like if you are disconnected or if you're having a bad conflict, you literally are changing your gene expression literally by the quality of your interactions with people. And so that may seem like a terrible thing, but it's actually really a good thing. It means we need to understand that not only is food and exercise and sleep and so forth necessary for health, but so is love and connection and relationships. It's not something we can like easily measure, but the biology of this is really fascinating. And I think given our society, there's a lot of obstacles to doing this. We're all more, quote, connected than ever. Just look at us on Instagram Live, but we're also kind of paradoxically more disconnected. And you talk about ways of helping people to overcome this sort of paradox of hyperconnectivity in one way, but disconnection in another way. Can you talk about some of the practical ideas? Because we're all even maybe feeling that even more now. So can you share with us? Because I think this is a moment we need to think about that.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you're raising that, Mark, because the more we learn about loneliness, the more we're realizing just how much it affects us on a genetic and cellular level. And the great thing about human connection is that a little bit of connection can go a long way in terms of making us feel better, enabling us to do better. And so I've realized that human connection is really the key to better health, to better performance, and to greater fulfillment. And there are some small steps we can take even right now in our lives to start down that path of building a more connected life, even though we're in the midst of physical distancing with the pandemic. So one of those things that we can do is to make sure that each day that we're spending at least 15 minutes with someone that we love. That could be video conferencing with them, could be calling them on the phone to ask how they're doing. It could be writing them an email to say, I'm thinking of you and just want to see what's going on in your life, and I want to share with you how I'm doing. That 15 minutes is not a lot of time, but it can, when done consistently over time, really build a lifeline to the outside world and improve how you feel in that moment. The second thing we can do is to focus on the quality of time we have with other people. Even if you don't change how much time you're spending with others, if you simply focus on increasing how present you are in those interactions, that can make a big difference. And you can do that by eliminating distraction. And I'll be the first to admit there are too many phone calls with friends, scrolling through my social media feed, refreshing my inbox, Googling a question that popped into my head, whether news is not in the background. I mean, we live in a world where multitasking is the norm. But there's a great myth behind multitasking, which is that, and the myth says that we can do it, and the science says we can't. Because what our brain actually does, what our brain actually does when we're multitasking is it's task switching. So when you're focused on just quickly looking at your feed or your inbox, you're actually not focused on the person that you're talking to. And the thing is, people can feel it. If you've ever had the privilege of being in a conversation with someone who is truly listening to you deeply.
I mean, like you. I get that feeling every time I talk to you.
Well, thanks, Mark. It's mutual, by the way. You're very present in your conversations. But if you ever have that feeling of being fully present with somebody, having them listen deeply, the experience where you feel like you can open up also and share with them, that's an incredibly powerful experience. And 5 minutes of fully present conversation can be more powerful than 30 minutes of distracted conversation. So that's the second thing to focus on, is the quality of our interactions by reducing and eliminating distraction. The third thing, though, and this is especially important now, is to find ways to serve each other. One of the great things I learned in the writing of this book, something I was taught by people all over the world, was that service is an antidote to loneliness.
Yeah.
And the reason it helps so much is because when we are chronically lonely, these counterintuitive things happen to us that actually deepen our loneliness. And one of them is that our focus shifts inward because we, in that stress state, are worried about our safety. We also experience an elevation in our threat level. And we also find that our self-esteem starts to erode over time as we perhaps come to believe that the reason we're lonely is that we're not likable or something's wrong with us. But service is powerful because it shifts the focus from us to someone else in the context of a positive interaction. And it reaffirms for us that we have value to bring to the world. The last thing I would share with you, Mark, is that as important as time spent with people and quality spent with them and service is to building connection with others, solitude is especially important in moments like this. And solitude doesn't mean that we need to go on a 7-day retreat, away from our family and friends, although if you have the opportunity to do that, those are incredibly renewing. But solitude can just be 5 minutes that we spend sitting on our stoop, listening to the world around us or feeling the breeze against our face. It can be 5 minutes spent remembering 3 things we're grateful for, or a few minutes spent in meditation or prayer, or simply taking a walk in nature. The reason these moments of solitude are so important is that in a chaotic world that's moving faster and faster, it's in these moments of solitude that we let that noise settle, that we recenter ourselves and ground ourselves, that we give ourselves a moment to reflect and to think about what's happening in our life. And when we approach other people from that place of groundedness, we often find we're able to be more fully present. We're able to focus more on the interaction, and the engagements we have with others, the relationships we experience, can be more fulfilling.
Yeah, I think that's true. Someone was commenting, well, what was that second point? It was the quality of the relationship, the quality of the conversation and connection. And I think you're so right. I mean, we have to be connected to ourselves in order to connect to others. And it's something, given the sort of hyper flow of data, information, stimuli. I read something, I don't remember the exact data, but it was like, in one day, the average human today is exposed to more information than a person spent in their entire lifetime, like 300 years ago. and we're not really wired that way. And I think, the phone thing is an interesting thing. It's like, it's an appendage, right? So if people lose their phone, like, where's my phone? Like, what's happening? Where's my phone? It's like anxiety producing. And there's this restaurant. It's not obviously open now, but they have a box on the table, and it says, open me. And inside it says, please put your phone in here and try to have a conversation. And it's so powerful. And there's another game you can play. Everybody has to put their phone in the center of the table, and then the first person to grab the phone has to pay the bill. But I think, for my wife and I, it's an issue for me because I got so much going on, and I'm always checking everything. And we have agreements where we have date night, but no phones. But leave it at home. She can bring hers to find out where we're going or get an Uber, but now we're home, so we don't even need it. And I think it's I thought I was doing it for her. But when I did it, I was for a weekend, I was like, wow, this feels so nice. And I remember just laying on the floor, on the rug, listening to jazz. She was doing something, and the cats were milling around, and I just did nothing, which is not normal for me. and I was like, wow, I thought I was doing this for her, but I'm actually feeling so much better doing it for me. And I think it's something that is a gift if we do that. And I think it does also enhance the quality of relationships. If you're with somebody and you look down at your phone or it bings, or it's just even if you leave your phone on the table face down, it still diminishes the quality of the interaction. I did want to ask you about something that is real, because I think reaching out to people, having connections is important, and I'm doing more of that. In fact, my niece is in Houston, my nephew's in Israel, my daughter's in Utah, my son's in New York, I'm up in Massachusetts, and so we've been having these weekly like Zoom hangouts. So we just check in, and we never did that before COVID-19. We never did that. How are you doing? What's happening? How's it going? And it's not even that long, maybe half an hour, and we just check in, and it's like, wow, this is really okay. Like this is I love to see their faces, and it makes me feel better. But many of us really don't have that. How many people, I don't know if it was in your book or not, I read that how many people don't have someone to call, don't have someone that they would say is their best friend who they can say anything to. How do you advise these people? Because I think this is more common than we think.
I think you're right, Mark. And two things that I'd say. One is just thinking about what you're doing with your wife around technology. That highlights a really important point, which is that technology is neither good nor bad. It's about how we use it that determines whether or not it helps augment our connections or weakens our connections. And one of the things we're realizing is that with tech, it's the boundaries that we place around where we allow tech into our lives that makes a difference so often. Like making sure we're not bringing it into allowing technology to invade our conversations, or that we're not bringing it with us to bed every night. So it's the first thing we see in the morning and the last thing we see before we sleep. I mean, these are important boundaries to keep so we can have moments of solitude, but also time with our family that's uninterrupted. But to your point about people who are alone and who don't have family and friends, and this is real, and it's not just a challenge in the United States, but all around the world. We're now seeing more and more data about people who say they do not have an individual that they can rely on in their lives. And I think in these moments, there are a couple of things that are worth remembering. One is that given how common loneliness is, even if you are not feeling lonely, it's likely that somebody you know, whether that's a work colleague or the parent of another one of your child's friends in school, or somebody in your neighborhood, it's likely that one of them actually is experiencing loneliness. And so this is a time where it's especially important for us to reach out to others, recognizing that people may be struggling. Sometimes we hesitate in sort of normal life to do that because we think, I don't know, I don't want to invade somebody's space. I don't want to intrude on them. I don't want to assume that they might be struggling. But let me tell you this, having talked to so many people and heard from so many folks online and offline over the last few weeks, everybody is struggling in some way just to make sense of this new normal and to figure out how to manage a life that's been turned upside down. So this is actually an opportunity for us to reach out to each other, recognizing that we're all in the same storm. And even though we may be in different boats of different sizes, we're experiencing some very, very similar challenges here. The second thing I would say, though, is to come back to the power and the importance of service. Because for people who are feeling isolated and alone, service can be that lifeline to the outside world. It's a way to accept it, in a very socially acceptable way, build bridges with other people, but also to remind yourself that as human beings, we all have intrinsic value to bring to the world. One of the things I worry about, Mark, when I think about our world, but especially when I think about my kids, who are 3 and 2 right now, and just at the earliest stages of discovering the world.
Wow, you're like Irish twins there.
Well, what I worry about is that the world that we're living in tells us that our fundamental worth as human beings is linked to our ability to be successful. And our ability to be successful is determined by whether we can acquire one of 3 things: wealth, power, or reputation. And so that's why we say, okay, if somebody's made it and they're really famous, then hey, they're successful. If they've sold a company and made a lot of money, or been promoted to a high position in a company or in government, then they're successful, they've made it. But the world is filled with people who are wealthy, famous, and powerful, who are very unhappy and who feel quite alone. And the reality, what I want my kids to learn growing up, what I want to remind myself of, and I need to remind myself of, is that our fundamental worth as human beings is not related to what we acquire. It's related to something that we're born with, which is our ability to give and receive love. And that love is the source of our power. It's a source of our worth. And we experience that love through relationships. That's why relationships are so central to who we are. And so I think this is a chance for us to recenter on that. And service is an opportunity to experience that intrinsic value that we all have. And it's, I think, something we need now more than ever.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of what my spiritual teacher really said, the Beatles. Love is all there is.
There's deep wisdom in
that. And you're right about this service thing, because I've studied a lot, and particularly in the context of the idea that our social relationships determine so much about our health. And looking at the science of this is fascinating, that we're hardwired to be in service. E.O. Wilson wrote this book, The Social Conquest of the Earth, about the need for social groups to thrive and have to work together, collaborate together, whether it's an ant or a tribe. It's the same. And we've lost our tribal society. We've lost our grounded communities. I mean, people didn't disperse all over the world, and you wouldn't have had to use Zoom to connect your family in 4 different continents. Like you just be like, two doors down. And I think the act of service actually stimulates the same brain targets as addictive substances like cocaine or heroin or sugar, which is fascinating, to give you that pleasure, that hit of pleasure. And I mean, your life has been a life of service, right? Your life has been, as a doctor, your life has been focused on improving the communities you live in. Your life is focused on, being a public servant as a Surgeon General. And now with your work on loneliness and togetherness, this is what you do and who you are. And I think it takes the locus of focus out of me, my, I, into us, we, together. And I think that's what's so beautiful about your book, Together, which is such a groundbreaking book that it names something that really hasn't been named before, and the healing power of not just togetherness, like having a party, but the really connecting into the human community, and whoever you are, wherever you are, you can be of service. And right now there's so much need to be of service, whether it's volunteering at a food bank, or helping people who can't get out of their homes get food and deliver food, or whether it's becoming a volunteer with all sorts of social programs that are needed now. I mean, I just did a podcast with Senator Bill Frist, and we were talking about the recommendations that they had made, a bunch of policy leaders to the White House administration around building up a workforce of community health workers, and people being in service. And for me, the times when I'm not thinking about myself, or the times that I'm the happiest, when I'm helping a patient, or when I'm trying to sort of, do something for somebody else, it makes me have a sense of value and of like meaning and purpose, and it takes me out of my own narcissistic, worries, which are mostly just noise in the head that aren't really real. And it sounds strange to say this, but among the happiest times of my whole life was when I was in Haiti, in the middle of this earthquake crisis where 300,000 people died, 300,000 people were injured, and we were working our butts off in the hospital, the main hospital in Port-au-Prince, taking care of people and working 20 hours a day, barely eating, barely having enough water, but I felt like I was doing something in service, and my needs and my worries, at least they were relevant. And I think that's what I've sort of decided my whole life is about. And, I think, it's always been my nature. Some of us are more like that than others, but it sometimes got me in trouble. But I do think that, this notion of being part of the human community and elevating us all together, hence the name of your book, is really the sort of key. And what's sort of moved me more than almost anything else, even though this is a horrific time and I don't wish it for any reason, but it sort of highlighted the fact that we are one human community, and that we are actually all acting as one human community to slow the spread of this virus by social distancing, by staying in our homes. I mean, it would have been unthinkable if you said 3 months ago, everybody in America has got to stay home for 2 months, like, or whatever, 3 months. Like,
Yeah.
people are going, you're crazy. That's never going to happen. But people understood that, we are one common humanity, and we have to together, work to solve this problem despite the hardships it's creating. And it is creating a lot of hardships for people, but people are, for the most part, all over the world, acting as one human community, acting in concert to address a threat. And it gives me hope for the future that maybe out of this we can see that we're all not that different, that we all need to sort of work together to solve our common problems globally, and that the more we listen to people like you who help highlight the importance of this, you're right. I mean, I think I'll say I've focused my whole life on, creating health through food and lifestyle and so forth, and talk about stress and sleep and all these things. But, and I have worked a lot on this sort of social issue, but, I'm coming to realize that this is probably the biggest obstacle facing us. If we don't address this pandemic of loneliness, if we don't address the social isolation, if we don't learn how to rebuild our connections and communities, which your book, together really helps to define and lay out in really practical terms, it's going to be tough for us and humanity going forward. So I'm actually so inspired to be able to talk to you and to know that you put this book out there in the world. I really want everybody to get it. It's available everywhere you want to get books. I think try local bookstores that are online. You don't have to go to Amazon, but I used to get a book in 12 hours, and now it's like it takes a couple of weeks, but it's fine. And I think it's so important. So you, Dr. Murthy, you are just a hero of mine. And I'd love you to share any sort of final thoughts or words of wisdom about how people should focus on getting through this next bunch of time, because it's not going to be over in a month, or even though society's reopening, it's going to be a longer time where we're still going to have to practice some level of social distancing. People are saying, what is the book called? Tell them about the book, where they can find it, and what it's called.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. The book is called the book is called Together: The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World. And I will just say that I wrote this book inspired and concerned about the challenge of loneliness. But along the way, what I discovered was the extraordinary power of social connection. And you're absolutely right, Mark. We were designed and built as human beings to be together, to help each other, to support each other, to serve each other. And in our moments of crisis, we return to those basic instincts. That's why you see in moments like this, like after hurricanes and tornadoes, after major disasters, people do come together. That is our instinct. In many ways, this book for me is not, it's a call to transform us, not into something that we're not, but it's a call to return us to who we intrinsically are, to who we were meant to be, which is beings who live in connection with each other, who recognize that together is not only how we're destined to be, but it's in togetherness that we find better health, greater performance, and greater fulfillment. There's this old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that, I think, is the story of our lives. And so as difficult as this moment is for all of us, my hope is that we can use it as an opportunity to refocus on our relationships and to think, after this pandemic ends, how do we want to be in relationship with each other? What priority do we want people to have in our lives? If I had a single credo that I would put to this book, it would be 3 words: put people first. Those simple words: put people first. And I want to live my own life in a way that puts people first. I want to raise my children. We're running around here as we speak. I want to raise my kids in a way that puts people at the center of their lives, that allows them to recognize that those moments where we give and receive love are the moments that we're being truly human. That's the glue that connects us, that love. And as powerful as the medicines are, Mark, that you and I have prescribed during our careers and written prescriptions for, there are few things that are more powerful than love when it comes
Yeah.
to forces that heal. So that is my hope, for what will come out of this difficult time. It's the message that I sought to deliver as I wrote this book. But I want us to be able to build a more people-centered life and a more people-centered world. And if we do that, then I think that we will come out of this stronger and more resilient than before this whole pandemic began.
So well said. I actually use that quote, that African proverb, at the end of almost all my lectures.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that we are better together, and it's when I often give my talks, I say health equals food is medicine plus love is medicine.
Mm.
And I think food is medicine, but love is also medicine, and not just in an abstract way. It literally changes our biology in ways that heal us, and that is the power of your book and the power of the message you're sharing. And we need a million more Dr. Murthy. So
And Mark Hyman, for sure.
Well, I just hope you're staying safe with your family and your children and your wife,
Thank
Alice,
you.
who's an awesome human being as well. And you guys are just such a gift to the world. And I thank you for calling out. And your book is just so, kind of eerily timely in this moment. And I think it's something everybody should read right now. So go wherever you get your books, Amazon, wherever. You can't go to the local bookstore anymore, but you can get from local bookstores, you can buy them online. And I would encourage you to pick up the book and read it and share it with your friends and family and figure out how to get together, because that's what we need right now more than ever.
Thanks so much, Mark. It's so good to be on with you. You stay safe and well.
Okay, I'll see you soon, buddy. And I want to talk to you more about some other stuff. I'm going to give you a shout later.
Okay, please do.
Okay.
We'd love to chat. Okay.
Okay,
All
bye.
right.
Stay safe.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.